Now, of course, they can stop people on the streets and demand identification, just like Nazi Germany, at any time they want to set up dragnets. And they look at everything that we do online, all of our electronic communications, all of our phone calls, emails. They track where we're going, they extrapolate and data mine that to try to determine what our political beliefs are, what our religious beliefs are, to try to predict what we're going to do. But they do not want to have, under any circumstances, any identification produced at the polling place. Well, we all know why that is. It's all about voter fraud. It's about creating fraudulent elections.
So, as with most programs involving high-tech cameras and an FBI database, the need for the programs is often said to stem from the need for greater safety and security. On the FBI's own website, it says the mission of the NGI is to reduce terrorist and criminal activities by improving and expanding biometric identification and criminal history information services through research, evaluation, and implementation of advanced technology within the IAFIS environment. So I want to talk about what this actually means with the woman who just did that report for us, Adriana Ucero. She joins me now to delve into the issue.
Christine.
Some interesting things there, and you really put it into perspective with the surveillance cameras that we even have all over our
Glad
newsroom.
everyone enjoyed.
Yeah. Do you think this is the trend of the future?
I mean, it looks like it, definitely. I mean, we're seeing this just as technology is moving forward. I mean, even right now, private companies are trying to track your every move and even anticipate what you're going to do next. So it really comes down to, yes, all signs point to that.
And I know that it was really interesting that you used the example of Facebook in your report.
Yes, scary.
Anyone who's on Facebook, I remember that first time I saw that feature when Facebook knew which ones of my friends were actually in the pictures before I even tagged them. Of course, once in a while getting it wrong, but for the most part kind of being
dead
right
set,
on.
Right on, yeah.
I mean, if that's what's being used on a regular person's Facebook, then, you know, what the FBI and what some of these governments are using must
a little bit more sophisticated.
Much more sophisticated. Do you think that we're going to see pushback, though, from the public?
I mean, honestly, we already are in some cases. Like, there are some privacy advocacy groups, you know, our friends at Electronic Frontier Foundation, Epic, so on and so forth, have already come out against, you know, these types of softwares. And also on the Hill, funny enough, probably less than a month ago, Senator Al Franken himself was grilling Facebook and, you know, Facebook's lawyers over the use of this technology, especially the fact that it's not really disclosed to any of the users. So, in other words, as I, you know, mentioned beforehand, you are already submitting to all of this without really knowing the extent. Plus, what you should really be worried about is that data bank, because without anything to cross-reference, there you go, there's nothing. So you've seen a little bit, but at the end of the day, you know, does safety trump your privacy? That's sort of the question there.
And that's one thing, you know, when you go on Facebook, especially if you don't have the most secure of settings, you're choosing to give up that privacy. And for a lot of people in younger generations, I mean, this is just what they have always known. They have always known a world with status updates and Facebook and, you know, uploading cell phone pictures onto the internet.
Checking into where you are,
exactly.
All of these things. Yeah.
And, you know, we make choices to do this because we want our friends to know. But to what extent do you think, you know, if you're a 14-year-old uploading all your pictures and, you know, 10 years later, you're in a store when an armed robbery happens, I mean, what's to prevent, you know, the wrong associations from being made?
I mean, that really depends. I mean, taking that example of like the 14-year-old, you know, uploading pictures, obviously you have to, you are making that choice. And obviously, of course, you have to be smart about what you do on the internet. There's no question about that. But the question really isn't that. The argument is when it's happening without your knowledge or your consent. That's the problem.
Absolutely.
So if something's happening, for example, if you're just walking down the street, you know, there's a camera, it takes your picture, and then it cross-references with something, with a database from, you know, I don't know, you were in LA, for example, and then you went to New York. There's someone tracking your move. Why? I mean, there are arguments to be made on both sides, but it comes down to, are you consenting to that? That is the big issue.
Well, and I think largely across the board, the answer to that question is no. The majority of people whose faces are put into the database, not only are not consenting to it, they have no idea it's going on. And yet this program has been in the works in some of these cities that you mentioned for more than a year now. Is that right?
Absolutely. It absolutely has. But I mean, going back to something you said beforehand, I mean, there is something to be said, be remiss if I don't mention, security.
Right.
There is something to be said about being smart, being able to, identify those threats and being able to secure, the homestead. That's absolutely a valid point. However, the very big issue is, and what I've seen and sort of talked about with other people here in this office, and that I've interviewed beforehand, the problem is to what extent are you giving up your privacy in order to be safe? So that is I
think that's the million-dollar question.
Exactly.
Right there. Adriana, I want to get to something else you talked about in your package, and that is Trapwire.
Yeah.
Trapwire is something that we kind of laid out the groundwork for, kind of explained to our viewers just a few days ago.
Yeah, we were one of the first ones to, I mean, if you go online right now, not to sort of, but shall we? I mean, we were one of the first ones to really cover that in depth. Absolutely.
And this is a program that was really sort of released in some documents on WikiLeaks just last week. Talk a little bit about Trapwire for those people who don't know, and the concept also of sort of outsourcing this activity.
I mean, it's pretty much what we know for certain is that it's a private company that has its own software, its own cameras, all of this, that is in DC, in New York, in LA, and I think I'm missing in Las Vegas. So what we do know is that it just, keeps tabs and on security. So in theory, it is supposed to keep you and I safe. So if we're in New York and there's some suspicious activity, that should be the first thing to raise a red flag. However, the problem comes with it's a private company. So it's not the government doing this, it's a private company. So they're taking all that information and storing it somewhere.
Right.
Where? What's happening with it?
Yeah.
What's
interesting
that's
too
the problem.
that private company is made up largely of former, FBI and
yeah,
CIA
we can go
top
down
officials,
the rabbit
but
hole. Absolutely.
Certainly a lot to talk about. A really neat way that you laid it out in your report. Adriana Uzzaro, thank you so much.
Night.
Sean here from truthfed.com, and we have what I consider to be red alert type news. FEC chair warns that conservative media like Drudge Report and Sean Hannity face regulation. Government officials are reacting to a growing voice of conservative news outlets, especially on the internet, are angling to curtail the media's exemption from federal election laws governing political organizations, a potentially chilling intervention the chairman of the Federal Elections Commission is vowing to fight. It goes on to say that all media has long benefited from the exemption of the FEC rules, thereby allowing outlets to pick favorites in elections and promote them without any limits or disclosure requirements like political action committees. So basically what they're trying to do here, and it's being pushed by Democrats, is to basically limit the voices online, limit media, like Drudge Report, which is cited here, from being able to have an opinion about favorites in elections. And this is just one step, more towards internet regulation to quiet media. And you're going to see these kind of attacks on alternative media, conservative media, just to kind of limit their voice. And it's a very, very alarming thing. The worst thing that could potentially happen is internet regulation. I think that that's one of the most dangerous things that we could allow the government to get away with, because once that happens, ladies and gentlemen, once the internet is regulated, once media is regulated, then it's game over, because they'll know, the internet is basically the only source of truth anymore. Mainstream media is nothing more than state-run media at this point, pushing the agendas of the administrations, regardless of what administration that is. They're basically just the puppy to the government. They do whatever the government likes, needs. I mean, if you watch MSNBC, whatever the narrative is, they'll be pushing, the pro-agenda for the administration. So if you take away, the internet, the alternative media, and you start regulating it, there'll be no truth left to be had. The Hill reports that the internet application and content companies, what some refer to as edge providers, are increasingly concerned by the Federal Communications Commission's FCC newfound ability to regulate the internet, and rightfully so. And I have to admit, this is definitely a very, very alarming article. As a result, we now live in a world where the FCC can arguably adopt almost any rule that conceivably promotes broadband deployment. As Judge Lawrence Silberman summarized in his dissent, Pestro, we have a new statute granting the FCC virtually unlimited power to regulate the internet. This is something that we definitely need to be aware of, that we need to get the word out about. It's at the top of Drudge Report. It's a very, very important issue. Like I said, internet freedoms are, the tip of the spear when it comes to promoting truth, for taking a stand against things that are right. The article says, ironically, the FCC could now start meddling the very edge providers it has claimed needed protection from meddling by broadband providers, and FCC could try Section 706 to intervene in many other areas. So we need to, get the word out about this, and we need to take a stand against it, because, like I said, the minute that internet freedom goes away and the media freedom goes away, and they start saying, if you're online or if you're in the media, you can't, have an opinion about, particular political candidates, then we're in a world of hurt. Like I said, this is the tip of the spear. So please get this information out. It's bombshell. It's important. It needs to be heard. Share it. Get it out on Facebook, Twitter, Google+. Do whatever you got to do. Hit the like sign. Leave some comments, and get this information out. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Sean with TruthFed.com, feeding you the truth.
A developing controversy concerning the Department of Defense and a new training manual that compares modern-day extremists with some of America's founding fathers. The Boston Tea Party has already been deemed an act of terror in some U.S. school districts, and now it seems the Department of Defense, at least according to this training manual, thinks the men who signed the Declaration of Independence weren't much better. A portion of the new manual reads, quote, in U.S. history, there are many examples of extremist ideologies and movements. The colonists who sought to free themselves from British rule, and the Confederate States who sought to secede from the northern states. Those are just two examples. Let's debate it. Sally Kohn is a Fox News contributor with SallyKohn.com. Brad Blakeman is former deputy assistant to President George W. Bush. Welcome to you both.
Nice to see you both.
All right, I got to read another part of this manual that's out there, and it says it is a training manual not to be used in practice, but it says, nowadays, instead of dressing in sheets or publicly espousing hate messages, many extremists will talk of individual liberties, states' rights, and how to make the world a better place. Sally, come on.
All right, so let's step back for a second and realize what this is about. This is about making sure that our military, which we all rely on to keep us all safe, that the people who serve in our military, those troops, answer to our commander-in-chief and their commanders, and not some extremist ideology. And to be fair, there are other portions you're not reading, including portions that single out black separatists, something I think they call eco-warriors, so groups that would traditionally be associated with the left, also as examples of extremists. The reality is, if someone shows up trying to sign up for our military thinking they're the second coming of George Washington, in this day and age, none of us. That's not good for any of us. That makes us all less safe.
Yeah, and you're right. There are a number of different groups that they single out, saying that these are examples of extremist ideology. But also, when you say things like states' rights and how to make the world a better place, that's a lot of people out there. And Brad, a lot of people feel like that's the same kind of language we heard with the IRS singling out the Tea Party.
Absolutely. Isn't that what the military does? Don't they fight for the very principles they now are cautioning people about? Don't they lay their lives on the line for fairness and equality and American values, the same values that our founding fathers put their life on the line for? And let's not forget, in times of change, it's what you define a radical to be. Was Washington a radical? I bet you the King of England thought he was. Was Martin Luther King a radical? Some people believed he was. But they fought for principle. And the principles that the Army or the military is now singling out as something that is un-American, or something that the military should not follow, is quite the opposite. They have it totally skewed as to what the principles that these so-called radicals were fighting for. We're fighting for them today. And when you single out the Tea Party, they're fighting for fairness, equality. They're fighting for responsibility in our debt and taxes. These aren't foreign subjects. These are very principles that our nation was founded on.
All right,
Brad,
I want to let folks know before we continue that, by the way, Todd Starnes, our reporter on this, referencing these documents that were obtained through a Freedom of Information Act by Judicial Watch. He said he repeatedly called the Pentagon. They did not return telephone calls seeking comment on these materials. Sally, do you think it would be helpful if they did clarify?
Well, sure, and I think it would be certainly helpful if we knew that this was the first time, when do these date back to? And some of them date back to, when Gates was Secretary of Defense, which, as we know, he was Secretary of Defense.
This, by the way,
under
is
Bush
a January,
as well.
just so we know, it's January 2013 Defense Equal Opportunity Management Institute student guide.
Right, but parts of what
So
you're
no.
quoting are from 2011. But here's the larger thing. I agree with Brad entirely. We want all of our troops to fight for American values. And I don't even know how to respond. This is such a mountain out of a molehill. You're cherry picking parts out of a report that, if you look at the entirety, simply say that our Department of Defense, our armed forces, should use their guidance to make sure that no extremists on either side of the ideological fence. It's very clear.
But
either
it's
side
an artfully
co-opt our armed forces.
put
Brad,
together.
I want to insert here because this is put together and it references the Southern Poverty Law Center, and the document itself says it relies and it cites heavily to the Southern Poverty Law Center, which, as you'll remember, has labeled a number of groups hate groups, including the Family Research Council. The man who went in there with a gun and said his plan was to kill as many people as possible said it was because he found that group listed on the Southern Poverty Law Center's website, and yet they have input into this document.
They don't have
Brad?
input into it if they're cited.
Well, no.
The document in its
their
totality
material.
is factually incorrect. It's wrong. It's the wrong tack that our military should be taking. And our military has better things to do than to slam our founding fathers and try and equate what they did for America. The fact is, in less than 300 years, we're the most powerful nation. We're looked at as the hope for the world. Is that such a bad thing? I don't think you should be arguing with success and trying to equate what our country was founded on with where we are today as far as pinning people as being radicals when they're far from it. And if they
Sally,
are radicals, they're radicals in
Sally?
the sense of what our founding fathers
Okay,
believed.
quick final word to Sally.
I don't think we'd want that man who went into the Family Research Council with a gun to join the armed forces either. And that's what this is about, preventing extremists on both sides. It's a very fair report, and we're making a mountain out of a molehill here, and we should be focused on keeping our country safe.
All right, I want you two to promise not to try to talk too much about how to make the world a better place. I want you to stay out of trouble. Sally and Brad, good to see you both.
Nice to see
Thank
you.
you.
All right.
In Screwed news, the torture programs may have ended, but the extrajudicial killings have not. The New York Times is out with a new piece reporting on President Obama's kill list, a top secret list of suspected terrorists maintained by the U.S. government that was started back in 2010. It's filled with names of so-called terrorists that the president personally oversees and signs off on final orders to kill, and the list includes American citizens, women, and teenagers. As the Times reports, the president has taken a complete hands-on approach to overseeing this so-called list, despite the moral and legal ramifications. Quote, Mr. Obama has placed himself at the helm of a secret nominations process to designate terrorists for kill or capture, of which the capture part has become largely theoretical. He had vowed to align the fight against al-Qaeda with American values. The chart, introducing people whose deaths he might soon be asked to order, underscored just what a moral and legal conundrum this could be. President Obama's hardline approach to counter terror has worried progressives who hope the exit of George W. Bush in the White House could mean an end to our brutal and often illegal war on terrorism. In reality, though, President Obama has ramped it up, which has to be flipping out the Republicans. Armed with his kill list, the president has increased drone strikes in Yemen and Somalia, as well as a drastic increase in drone strikes in Pakistan. Just today, a U.S.-led NATO force launched a strike against al-Qaeda's second-in-command in Afghanistan, killing him. But despite the cold efficiency that keeping a kill list and launching drone strikes might bring to our ongoing war on terror, it raises a fundamental question that has been with this nation since 9/11. And that is, how many American values are we willing to compromise in the name of security? According to our Constitution, everyone, including non-citizens, are entitled to our criminal justice system, to due process. When President Obama himself plays the role of judge, jury, and executioner, then have we lost sight of what it means to have a legal system in the first place?
I'd like to address three areas, and I'd like to start with the topic you were just discussing, the topic of drones. In your response to Senator Paul yesterday, you suggested there may well be circumstances in which it is permissible to use drones to target a U.S. citizen on U.S. soil. I'd like to explore those circumstances, and in particular you pointed to two. You pointed to Pearl Harbor and 9/11, both of which were extreme military attacks on the homeland. I want to ask a more specific question. If an individual is sitting quietly at a cafe in the United States, in your legal judgment, does the Constitution allow a U.S. citizen on U.S. soil to be killed by a drone?
For sitting in a cafe and having a cup of coffee?
If that individual is not posing an imminent and immediate threat of death or bodily harm, does the Constitution allow a drone to kill that individual?
On the basis of what you said, I don't think you can arrest that person.
The person is suspected to be a terrorist. You have abundant evidence he's a terrorist. He's involved in terrorist plots. But at the moment, he's not pointing a bazooka at the Pentagon. He is sitting in a cafe. Overseas, the United States government uses drones to take out individuals when they're walking down a pathway when they're sitting at a cafe. If a U.S. citizen on U.S. soil is not posing an immediate threat to life or bodily harm, does the Constitution allow a drone to kill that citizen?
I would not think that that would be an appropriate use of any kind of lethal force. We would deal with that in the way that we typically deal with a situation like that. You would expect
with respect, General Holder, my question wasn't about appropriateness or prosecutorial discretion. It was a simple legal question. Does the Constitution allow a U.S. citizen on U.S. soil who doesn't pose an imminent threat to be killed by the U.S. government?
I do not believe that. Again, you have to look at all of the facts, but on the facts that you have given me, and this is a hypothetical, I would not think that in that situation the use of a drone or lethal force would be appropriate, because the possibility...
General Holder, I have to tell you, I find it remarkable that in that hypothetical, which is deliberately very simple, you are unable to give a simple one-word, one-syllable answer, no. I think it is unequivocal that if the U.S. government were to use a drone to take the life of a U.S. citizen on U.S. soil and that individual did not pose an imminent threat, that would be a deprivation of life without due process.
Maybe I have not been clear. I said that the use of lethal force, and I'm saying drones, guns, or whatever else would not be appropriate in that circumstance.
You keep saying appropriate. My question isn't about propriety. My question is about whether something is constitutional or not. As Attorney General, you are the chief legal officer of the United States. Do you have a legal judgment on whether it would be constitutional to kill a U.S. citizen on U.S. soil in those circumstances?
A person who is not engaged, as you described. Again, this is the problem with hypotheticals. But the way in which you have described this person sitting at the cafe, not doing anything imminently, the use of lethal force would not be appropriate, would not be something...
I find it remarkable that you still will not give an opinion on the constitutionality. Let me move on to the next topic, because we've gone round and round.
Either you are with us or you are with the terrorists.